It's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision-making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question in this series of questions from one of my clients, Steve, and the question last week was part 3 of my 73-year-old mum had a stroke and is intubated in intensive care. She can't come off the ventilator and the breathing tube. Can she have a tracheostomy and go home and have intensive care at home? You can check out last week's episode by clicking on the link below this video. You can also find part 1, part 2 and part 3 again by clicking on the links below this video. And if you're watching this on YouTube, click on the link below this video. That'll get you to our website to all the other resources as well. So in this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer the next question from my client Steve, which are excerpts from phone and email counseling and consulting sessions with me. And the question this week is part 4 of my 73-year-old mum had a stroke and is intubated in intensive care. She can't come off the ventilator and the breathing tube. Can she have a tracheostomy and go home and have intensive care at home? So in the last episode with Steve, his mum was still struggling to come off the ventilator and the breathing tube. But eventually she managed to come off the ventilator and even leave intensive care. So now Steve continues with his mother's situation as follows. Steve writes, "Hi Patrick. My mother was doing very well and resumed eating food, and we were just waiting for a bed in the neurology rehab center. Her private insurance would only cover her for 2 weeks rehab. But unfortunately last night she suffered a cardiac arrest, and apparently there has been a prolonged period with no oxygen to her brain. She was resuscitated for 8 minutes but is now in a natural coma and mostly unresponsive. The doctors have said that 96 hours is the quote-unquote magic number, and we would need to see improvement in her conscious state or beyond that is quite hopeless. Is there any light you can shed around this? It would be much appreciated as always. Also, as always, having full knowledge helps, and you are really knowledgeable and you know your stuff. I'm not sure about cooling therapy, I will ask, because I know many patients after cardiac arrest go into cooling therapy. If anything, I know she has a high temperature at the moment, so they're trying to keep her cool. Her limbs are very cool to touch. So she's booked in to do a CT scan, and they said they generally do an MRI on day 3. At the moment they say it's just about time and see what happens over the next 24 hours. They've given antibiotics to deal with the infection in the lungs as she may have aspirated. Beyond that, she's heavily unconscious. Last time this happened, when she was unconscious and admitted back to ICU, she woke up as soon as the sedation wore off. I'll update you, and I know there's not much that can be done for now, but as always, your information, if you have any, can help so much. Many thanks. We also just had a meeting with everyone. The doctors, which included the neurologist and the intensivist, were pretty clear on the damage done to most of her brain cells from the MRI. There isn't really a decision to be made, just when enough family have come to pay their last visits would guide when they'd switch off the machines. They can't say that she's brain dead as part of her brainstem are still working. Her eyes flicker, she coughs spontaneously and jolts every now and then. But I do think it's important to speak to you first, just to see if we are missing anything, but otherwise, thank you so much for everything you're doing, from Steve. So here's my response. Hi Steve. Cooling therapy after cardiac arrest should be standard therapy after cardiac arrest and a long quote-unquote downtime. It's to protect the brain and other major organs to minimize oxygen consumption. It's usually done for up to 72 hours and then patients are being woken up. Temperature is usually being cooled down to 32 to 33.9 Celsius, which equals 90 to 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Not sure why they are not doing it in your mother's situation, but I would definitely ask. Sometimes it is intensive care consult dependent, and sometimes they may argue it only needs to be done in and out of hospital cardiac arrest. Your mother's cardiac arrest was in hospital, and therefore they may argue she had a faster response time to the cardiac arrest from the medical team. But two things stand out to me and will most likely impact on the survival or the recovery of your mother, which is number one, the damage done to the heart, and number two, the potential brain damage. And yes, CT or MRI of the brain are often done after 72 hours, but often after cooling therapy as well. My advice for now, with the limited information you have given me, would be not to get pressured again to agree to anything you are not comfortable with, unless they are clear on the damage done to the heart or the brain. I would also check out some further reading resources that I put below this video. For example, you may want to look at the article and video, What Happens If My Critically Ill Loved One Had a Period Where They Had Insufficient Oxygen Supply to the Brain? What is the prognosis after the brain has had not enough oxygen supply, which is also known as hypoxic brain injury? So I highly encourage you to check out this article and video to do some more research. The next thing they should evaluate is the damage done to the heart, and they can do that by doing an ultrasound or echocardiogram of the heart. Even though you haven't mentioned it, there is a high chance your mother is on inotropes or vasopressors to maintain a physiological blood pressure and also to increase and maintain pump function of the heart, which is also known as contractility. Your mother is most likely on inotropes or vasopressors such as noradrenaline, also known as norepinephrine, vasopressin, dobutamine, or milrinone. Even though there is a very high chance that your mother may not survive this setback since she left ICU a few days ago, you still don't want to rush into making a quote-unquote final decision. If your mother is not suffering and you haven't mentioned any of it, there is no reason to rush things. So, the best thing that can happen is that your mother is going to improve, and the worst thing that's going to happen is that she may die, which is pretty much what the ICU team is predicting, and in all honesty, it looks that way. You still want to do more research, and you want to make sure that you and your family are at peace and in agreement with everything that's happening. For example, make sure your mother is in a real and not a perceived end-of-life situation. You may wonder what's the difference. Go and have a look at the article and video, The Difference Between Real and Perceived End-of-Life Situations When Your Loved One is Critically Ill in Intensive Care. I put a link below this video in the written version of this blog. It's vital to know the difference between a real and a perceived end-of-life situation in intensive care. You certainly don't want to leave anything to chance, which you haven't been doing anyway, and you certainly don't want to leave any stones unturned before making a decision. Next, you want to make sure at this stage that your mother is continuing to get full treatment until you and your family have made a decision what the next steps are. What often happens in situations like this is that intensive care teams issue a DNR, also known as a Do Not Resuscitate, or NFR, not for resuscitation order. They do this without informing you, and quite frankly, it's illegal. However, intensive care teams do it all the time because their agenda is way more important to them than it is talking to you and your family. And they simply don't want to be transparent in their decision making. 99% of families of critically ill patients in intensive care have no idea that things like that are happening. Excuse me. And that's why it's so important that you do your own research, that you question everything. And that's why you need to hire somebody like me, who knows the industry inside out and actually knows and understands what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care. Most families in intensive care are shocked when I tell them the things they need to watch out for. And they are shocked when they realize what unethical practices do happen in intensive care on a day-by-day basis in first world countries like the United States, Canada, the UK and Australia. The good news is that with my strategies you can put a stop to it if you want to, and you will be in a position of strength to buy time for your mother if you want to. Also, there is no such thing as the quote-unquote magic number like 96 hours without response means your mother is going to die. It's all a whole lot of BS. The most important and the most precious resource is time. And by quote-unquote framing your mother's diagnosis, her prognosis, as well as her care and her treatment in tight and unrealistic time frames, it's clearly telling me that they don't want to give her that time. Many, if not most, critically ill patients in intensive care recover if they are given time, and clearly time is money in intensive care terms, and most intensive care units are trying to run a tight ship, so to speak, and they're trying to manage their financial budgets, their beds, and their staffing resources. I have seen it all over and over again after nearly 20 years intensive care nursing experience in 3 different countries, where I literally looked after thousands of critically ill patients and their families, and where I also worked as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for over 5 years. And now, with my own consultancy for families in intensive care, I hear the same stories over and over again every single day, and I know how to get outcomes and results for families and their loved ones in intensive care really quickly, because I know the system so well, and I know what questions to ask. The quote-unquote magic number of days that critically ill patients in intensive care need to recover is simply often unknown, and that's why intensive care teams tend to be so quick to suggest to remove life support or to quote-unquote withdraw treatment, or to issue a DNR, do not resuscitate, or NFR, not for resuscitation order, most of the time against patients' and families' wishes. It's good for you that you have been challenging the intensive care team from the start, and the intensive care team knows by now that you are not a pushover like 99% of the families of critically ill patients in intensive care. You know that you have a choice, and you know how to exercise it, and you know how to get what you want by now, because you have sought my counsel, consulting and advocacy. I can't tell you how many families in intensive care contact me every day. They believe that they have no choice whatsoever. They have a limited mindset, they are intimidated by the intensive care team, and they don't believe in themselves or in the advice that I can give them. For now, keep waiting and don't let the intensive care team push you to do anything you are not comfortable with. Time will tell you everything you need to know. Yes, also, being in a natural coma after cardiac arrest and now being responsive and not being responsive is highly suggestive of significant brain damage, and the prognosis for your mother doesn't look good at this stage. But once again, it's only been 48 to 72 hours since the cardiac arrest, and therefore it's way too early to make a life or death decision. You see, one of the fallacies in intensive care is that doctors and nurses often only see patients at their worst, and quite frankly that is a lot to take in, even for the strongest and most seasoned intensive care professional. The challenge is to move beyond it and look at what's possible when patience is being applied. Again, you will see in the next few days or weeks if brain damage is confirmed, and if your mother isn't waking up, then there is a good chance she may die. Until this has been proven, beyond the shadow of a doubt, let's wait and see. If it has been proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, you may still want other things that are important for you and for your family. Maybe you want her to die at home in peace rather than let her die in hospital. You have asked about intensive care at home already, and we can provide palliative care for your mother at home with intensive care at home if you want to. This provides a genuine alternative to letting your mother die in intensive care. Best wishes from Patrick. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? How can you make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? Well, you get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision-making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what is really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered episode, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Or you can call me, find phone numbers on the top of the website. Also, check out our ebook section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one counseling and consulting with me via Skype over the phone or via email by clicking on the Products tab on the top of the website. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.